Imagine that you are about to discover hidden secrets that can transform your life in surprising ways. Over the years, many miracles chronicled in the Bible have been forgotten or ignored, but they carry powerful and practical lessons that can change your perception of faith, money, and everyday life. Have you ever thought that some of the greatest secrets to prosperity and healing may be hidden in ancient stories? Get ready to immerse yourself in a world where the impossible becomes possible and where divine power can manifest in ways you never imagined. And best of all, you'll discover how to apply these lessons in your daily life, making the extraordinary part of your routine. The miracle of the multiplication of oil, 2 Kings 4:1-7. Imagine a desperate widow in debt, not knowing how to support her family. She had only a little oil, which seemed insignificant compared to her needs. But when he sought the prophet Elisha, something extraordinary happened. That little oil was multiplied in a miraculous way, filling several vessels. This miracle is a clear example of how, in times of financial crisis, divine intervention can turn the little we have into abundance. This biblical miracle is not just an ancient story, it is an object lesson for today. Often when bills seem to pile up and money is scarce, it can feel impossible to get out of the hole. However, like the widow, we may find that creative solutions and faith can open unexpected doors. In times of difficulty, instead of focusing on the lack, it is essential to look at what we have, no matter how small, and trust that God can multiply our resources in ways we never imagined. Have you ever stopped to think about how this story can apply to your life today? When we face crises, such as debt or a lack of money, remembering this miracle gives us hope and inspiration. Maybe it's time to look at what you have at your disposal, whether it's a skill, a talent, or even that little money saved, and trust that just like the widow's oil, God can make it enough to meet your needs and even go beyond. And of course, as we think about miracles like this, we begin to see that the Bible is filled with lessons about how to make money and prosper in ways we never imagined. The healing of Naaman the leper, 2 Kings 5:1-14. Naaman, a powerful Syrian commander, was plagued by a terrible disease, leprosy. For all his wealth and influence, he could not find a cure for his illness until he heard about a prophet in Israel, Elisha. As he followed the simple instruction to dive 7 times into the Jordan River, something unexpected happened. His skin was restored, becoming like that of a child. This miracle highlights a profound truth. Often the solution to our biggest problems lies in humility and obedience to directions that seem insignificant. This account teaches us a powerful lesson about healing and transformation that we can experience as we let go of pride and accept divine guidance, even if they seem simple or unusual. In modern life, we are used to looking for complex and expensive solutions to our problems, but this story shows us that sometimes the simplest way can be the most effective. Think about the last time you ignored a seemingly simple solution that could have transformed your situation. Perhaps, like Naaman, you need to reconsider instructions that seem humble but can have the power to change your life. In addition, this story makes us reflect on how, in our search for healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, it is vital to be open to the possibilities that God puts in our path, even if they come in unexpected ways. In fact, obedience to these small steps may be what unlocks the miracle we seek so much. Just as Naaman was healed by following a simple instruction, we may also discover that the solution to our challenges, including financial ones, may lie in humble actions and trusting that God knows what is best for us. The floating axe, 2 Kings 6:1-7. During a simple task of chopping wood, a young prophet saw the axe he was using, a borrowed instrument, fall into the water and sink. Desperate, he called Elisha, who miraculously made the axe float, allowing it to be recovered. This miracle, though seemingly minor compared to other great biblical feats, teaches us that God cares about the everyday details of our lives, even those that may seem insignificant to others. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, it's easy to think that God only cares about big problems, such as serious illnesses or financial crises, but the story of the floating axe shows us otherwise. Small challenges, such as the loss of a work tool, are also on the divine radar. This episode makes us reflect on the times when we face situations that seem unimportant, but that for us are a cause for great concern. God sees these moments and is willing to intervene, showing that nothing is too small for his care. This miracle invites us to trust God in all aspects of life, even in the most ordinary and seemingly mundane situations. Whether it's a problem at work, an unexpected financial loss, or any other everyday situation, we can be sure that God is attentive and ready to help us. And so as we see his hand at work in the details, our faith is strengthened, reminding us that he is a God of miracles, both in the great deeds and in the small interventions that can change the course of our day. Jeroboam's hand, 1 Kings 13:4-6. When King Jeroboam tried to arrest a prophet of God, his hand suddenly dried up, rendering him useless. Frightened by what had happened, Jeroboam asked the prophet to pray for him, and by God's grace his hand was restored. This miracle serves as a powerful reminder of God's sovereignty over everyone, including those in positions of power. It is a demonstration that no matter how powerful we are or appear to be, we are still under divine authority. In a world where injustice may seem to prevail, this story offers us comfort and hope. It shows us that divine justice does not fail, and that God is always attentive to the actions of the powerful. When we see leaders and authorities abusing their power, it is natural to feel helpless. However, this biblical narrative reminds us that God can intervene decisively, putting limits on injustice and bringing correction where it is needed. This can encourage us to trust in divine justice more than in human solutions. In addition, this story also teaches us about God's mercy. Even when Jeroboam opposed the prophet and suffered the consequences, God, through the prophet's intercession, restored the king's hand. It is a clear example that regardless of how far one may have strayed from God, there is always the possibility of redemption and healing as long as there is repentance. In our lives, this encourages us to never underestimate the power of intercession and to believe that divine grace is available to all, even those who initially rebel against God's way. The shadow of Ahaz's clock recedes. 2 Kings 20:8-11. At a critical moment in King Hezekiah's life, God made an extraordinary sign to confirm his promise of healing. The shadow on Ahaz's sundial turned back 10 degrees. This miracle not only confirmed Hezekiah's recovery, but also showed that God has complete control over time and nature. It is irrefutable proof that there are no limits to divine power, even when the situation seems impossible to human eyes. This event challenges us to expand our understanding of what God can do in our lives. We are often tempted to think that certain things are immutable or that lost time can never be recovered. However, the story of the receding shadow reminds us that God can reverse the course of events, bringing healing, restoration, or even a second chance in ways we never imagined. This teaches us never to underestimate what he is able to accomplish, even when all circumstances seem fixed. In addition, this miracle is an inspiration to believe in the power of bold prayer. When Hezekiah prayed for a sign, he received an answer that defied all known natural laws. In our lives, this encourages us to pray in faith, believing that God can do the impossible, whether it's health, finances, or any other aspect of life. Just as the sundial has been altered, we can also see extraordinary changes occur in situations that once seemed unalterable. The brazen serpent, Numbers 21:4-9. During the Israelites' journey through the wilderness, many were bitten by poisonous serpents as a result of their murmuring against God. In response, God instructed Moses to make a bronze serpent and place it on a pole. Those who looked upon it would be healed. Not only did this miracle bring physical healing, but it also served as a powerful symbol of the importance of turning our eyes to God in times of crisis, recognizing that faith in him is essential for our salvation. This story brings a relevant lesson for today, especially when we face situations that seem to have no way out. Just as the Israelites had to look to the brazen serpent to be healed, we are invited to direct our attention to God and his provision in times of trouble. Faith is often the first step in overcoming problems that, at first glance, seem insurmountable. And this faith must be practical, leading us to actions that demonstrate our trust in God, such as prayer, reading Bible verses that reinforce our hope, and seeking wise counsel. In addition, the bronze serpent foreshadows Christ, who offers us spiritual and physical healing through faith in him. In modern life, this reminds us that no matter how complex our problems are, the solution always begins with looking to Jesus, recognizing that he has the power to save us, whether in matters of health, finances, or other areas of life. Just as the Israelites found healing by fixing their eyes on the brazen serpent, we too can find answers to our dilemmas by turning to Christ, who is the source of all power and provision. The sun and moon standing still, Joshua 10:12-14. In the midst of a crucial battle, Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, prayed a bold prayer asking God for the sun and moon to stand still in the sky, prolonging the day so that they could overcome their enemies. And amazingly, God granted the request, making the sun and moon stand still, giving Joshua and his army the time they needed to secure victory. This extraordinary miracle shows us the immense power of prayer and how God can intervene in a supernatural way when we cry out in faith and determination. This biblical event defies human logic and inspires us to believe that prayer has the power to change the course of history, even when all seems lost. In our modern lives, this encourages us to pray with courage and faith, especially in desperate situations. Imagine being in the midst of a financial or personal crisis that seems impossible to overcome. Rather than giving in to despair, we are called to pray boldly, believing that God can make the impossible happen, whether it's multiplying resources, opening unexpected doors, or even interrupting the natural course of events to grant us victory. Additionally, the story of Joshua reminds us that God is mindful of our struggles and is willing to intervene in powerful ways when we act in faith. It is not just about passively waiting for a miracle, but about taking courageous action, knowing that in doing so, God can respond in ways that defy all expectations. Thus, this Bible account not only motivates us to have faith, but also to act with the assurance that with God's help, even the impossible can be conquered. The resurrection of man with Elisha's bones, 2 Kings 13:20-21. After the death of the prophet Elisha, an extraordinary miracle took place. A man was resurrected by coming into contact with Elisha's bones, which were in his tomb. This event teaches us that God's power can manifest itself in unexpected ways, even through objects or people who have been dedicated to him. It is a powerful reminder that the divine presence can continue to work miracles even after the death of a faithful servant. This miracle, which may seem strange at first glance, leads us to reflect on the holiness and power that can reside in objects and places consecrated to God. In our everyday lives, this can make us reconsider the importance of keeping our faith alive in all aspects of our lives, including the objects we use or the places we frequent. Additionally, it invites us to think about the spiritual legacy we have left behind and how our dedication to God can continue to have an impact even when we are no longer present. As we look back on this story, we are inspired to understand that God's power knows no bounds and can manifest itself in surprising ways. If a man can be resurrected by touching Elisha's bones, it leads us to believe that God can use anything or anyone to accomplish his purposes in our lives. It reminds us that in times of need, we must be open and attentive to the unusual ways in which God may choose to act, and never underestimate the potential for a miracle to arise from where we least expect it. Elisha's multiplication of the loaves, 2 Kings 4:42-44. In a time of scarcity, a man brought Elisha 20 barley loaves and some grain, a small offering considering the 100 hungry mouths that needed to be fed. However, Elisha, trusting in divine provision, ordered food to be distributed, and miraculously everyone ate and there was still left. This miracle teaches us that when we trust in God, He can multiply even the most modest of resources, supplying our needs and beyond. This story resonates strongly in times of financial hardship, when resources seem insufficient for the demands we face. It encourages us to give what we have, no matter how small, into God's hands, believing that He can make it more than enough. We are often tempted to keep what little we have for fear that it will not be enough, but this miracle challenges us to be generous and trusting, believing that God is able to provide in surprising ways. In addition, the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves performed by Elisha makes us reflect on the power of faith and obedience. By following Elisha's instructions, men witnessed an act of divine provision that exceeded all expectations. In modern life, this encourages us to rely on spiritual leadership and guidance on our journey, knowing that God is faithful to multiply what we have and meet every need we encounter along the way, including in our finances. The prophet's healing of Jeroboam's hand, 1 Kings 13:6. Jeroboam, while attempting to arrest a prophet of God, saw his hand instantly wither, a clear sign of divine displeasure. However, by acknowledging the error and asking the prophet to pray for him, his hand was restored. This miracle illustrates the incredible mercy of God, who, even in the face of disobedience, is willing to forgive and restore those who repent. It is a powerful reminder that regardless of our failures, there is always an opportunity for redemption. In modern life, this story invites us to reflect on how we treat our own mistakes and the mistakes of others. How often do we find ourselves in situations where our actions result in negative consequences? Like Jeroboam, we can find restoration by acknowledging our shortcomings and seeking divine intercession. It reminds us that God's grace is available to everyone, and that the first step to healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, is humility and repentance. In addition, this miracle also teaches us about the power of intercessory prayer. The prophet, in praying for Jeroboam, was the channel through which healing was released. In our everyday lives, this encourages us to pray not only for our needs, but also for the needs of those around us, believing that God can work powerfully through our prayers to bring about healing and restoration, even in the most difficult situations. This example of healing and forgiveness inspires us to live with compassion and to extend a helping hand, knowing that we are all in constant need of divine mercy. The turning of bitter water into sweet, Exodus 15:22-25. As the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, they came to Marah, where they found bitter waters impossible to drink. In desperation, they cried out to Moses, who, following God's instruction, threw a piece of wood into the water, turning it into fresh, drinkable water. This miracle reveals God's ability to transform bitter situations into blessings, showing that even in the most difficult moments, divine provision is within the reach of those who trust in Him. In modern life, it is common to come across moments that seem bitter, whether it is financial difficulties, complicated relationships, or personal challenges. The story of the waters of Marah teaches us that instead of despairing, we should seek God's guidance, trusting that He can transform even the most adverse circumstances into opportunities for growth and blessing. By acting in faith and following divine directions, we can experience amazing transformations in areas of life that seemed hopeless. Moreover, this story inspires us to keep hope alive, even in times of crisis. Often what seems to be an insurmountable obstacle can become a source of sustenance when placed in God's hands. Just as wood transformed the water of Marah, small actions of faith, such as prayers, meditations on Bible verses, or acts of kindness, can be the catalyst for change in our lives. This miracle reminds us that God is always present, ready to turn our bitterness into sweetness, as long as we are willing to trust Him and act on His instructions. The miracle of the water well in the wilderness, Numbers 21:16-18. During the journey through the wilderness, the Israelites found themselves again in a desperate situation with no water to drink. God, however, instructed Moses and the people to dig a well, and as they obeyed, they found water in a dry, barren place. This miracle demonstrates God's provision in unexpected places, showing that even in the most desolate moments, faith and obedience can open up sources of sustenance and renewal. In our lives, this story teaches us the importance of perseverance and trust in God, even when everything seems barren and hopeless. Often we find ourselves in metaphorical deserts, where there seems to be no way out or solution to our financial, emotional, or spiritual problems. However, this miracle encourages us to keep digging, to keep searching, with the certainty that at the right time, God will spring up a source of provision exactly where we least expected it. Moreover, this event challenges us not to underestimate the power of action combined with faith. The Israelites did not merely wait for divine provision, they acted, dug the well as instructed by God, and were rewarded with plenty of water. It reminds us that in our everyday lives, we must be willing to take steps of faith, to do the necessary work, believing that God is working together with us to provide us with what we need. This miracle inspires us to trust that even in the most arid deserts of life, God can surprise us with hidden blessings, as long as we are willing to follow His directions. Now that you've discovered these forgotten biblical miracles, it's time to reflect on how these stories can impact your life. What would you do if you knew that the power to transform your situation is within your reach? Simply by applying these teachings. If you really want to see changes in your life, whether financially, emotionally, or spiritually, ask yourself, am I ready to act in faith and expect the unexpected? The Bible shows us that God can do the impossible, but it is up to us to take the first steps of obedience and trust. So why not start now? How about putting into practice what you have learned? And if you want to continue to explore these revelations and other life-changing Bible lessons, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. The multiplication of wine by the hands of Elijah, 1 Kings 17:13-16. During a great drought, the widow of Zarephath faced the harsh reality of scarcity, with only a little flour and oil remaining. When the prophet Elijah instructed her to make bread with these latter resources, she obeyed, and a miracle happened. The provision did not run out until the rain returned. This miracle underlines God's faithfulness in providing for those who trust and obey, even in times of scarcity. It reminds us that by putting God first, we can experience His lasting blessings. In modern life, it is common to face moments when resources seem limited and insufficient for the demands that are presented. The story of the widow and Elijah encourages us to trust God even when the situation seems hopeless. By obeying and prioritizing divine directions, we can see what little we have multiplied in unimaginable ways. This teaches us the importance of moving forward in faith, believing that God can provide for all of our needs in ways that go beyond human logic. This event also challenges us to live a life of practical faith, where our actions reflect our trust in God. The widow of Zarephath stepped out of faith by sharing what little she had with Elijah, and her obedience resulted in a steady provision throughout the drought. In our reality, this means that even in times of financial crisis, we must continue to act with generosity and faith, believing that God is able to multiply our resources in ways we could never imagine. The miracle of the ravens. Feeding Elijah, 1 Kings 17:4-6. During a time of severe drought, God commanded Elijah to hide near the brook Cherith, where ravens brought him bread and meat daily. This miracle highlights God's care and provision in unusual and unexpected ways. It is a powerful reminder that even when all resources seem exhausted, God can use even the most unlikely means to meet the needs of those who trust in Him. In our lives, this story teaches us the importance of trusting God, especially when we find ourselves in situations that seem hopeless. Often we face moments of difficulty where the solution is not visible and the resources seem non-existent. However, just as Elijah was sustained by ravens, we can believe that God can provide for us in unexpected ways, using means we would never have imagined. It inspires us to keep the faith, knowing that God cares for us in every aspect, even in the simplest details. In addition, this miracle encourages us to be mindful of the unusual ways in which God can work in our lives. Sometimes help can come from where we least expect it, and it's important to be open to recognizing and receiving these provisions. By following divine guidance, even in times of uncertainty, we can experience God's care in ways that surpass our comprehension and that remind us of His faithfulness in all circumstances. Jesus' multiplication of fish and loaves, Matthew 14:13, 21, Matthew 15:32, 39. When Jesus was faced with hungry crowds, he performed one of the most well-known miracles in the Bible, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. With only 5 loaves and 2 fish, he fed thousands of people, and there were still leftovers. This miracle demonstrates Jesus' power to provide for the physical needs of many people with limited resources, showing that with faith, scarcity can be transformed into abundance. In modern life, this miracle reminds us that in times of lack, faith in Jesus can bring solutions that surpass human understanding. Often we are faced with situations where the resources we have seem insufficient to meet the needs around us. However, the story of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes encourages us to present what we have to Jesus, trusting that he can multiply and supply our needs, just as he did the multitude. Moreover, this narrative challenges us to act generously, even when it seems we have little to offer. Jesus' confidence that little would be enough to feed the crowd is an example to all of us that, in God's hands, even what we consider insufficient can be used to do great things. This story inspires us to trust in divine providence and to share what we have, believing that God can do much with the little we offer. The resurrection of the son of the widow of Nain, Luke 7:11-17. During a funeral in the city of Nain, Jesus encountered a widow who had lost her only son, which meant not only emotional pain, but also the loss of her security and livelihood. Moved by compassion, Jesus interrupted the procession and resurrected the young man, restoring his life and restoring his mother's hope. This miracle highlights Jesus' power over death and his compassion for our deepest pains. This miracle comforts us, showing us that Jesus is sensitive to our pain and that he has the power to transform the most desperate situations. In modern life, where we face loss and moments of deep sorrow, this story reminds us that Jesus can intervene in powerful ways, bringing life where there is death, hope where there is despair. He not only understands us, but he is also willing to act on our behalf. Moreover, this story challenges us to believe that there is no situation so desperate that it is beyond Jesus' reach. His compassion is immense and his power is unlimited. So in times of crisis, we should remember this miracle and trust that Jesus can, in his love and power, transform our lives, bringing healing and restoration where we need it most. This trust allows us to live with the hope that with Jesus, even death does not have the final word. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any content, because we're just beginning this journey of discoveries that will surprise and transform you. Remember, the next miracle may be just a prayer or an attitude of faith away. Are you ready?